I think there's a big gap between like where the technology is and where customers are right now. And we need to be able to bridge that gap and close that by creating solutions that are easy to adopt and implement.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode of Tokenizecast, a podcast discussing on emerging technologies and trends. Episode after episode, we bring in experts and get their opinions on how these technologies are shaping up our present and the future. And today, we have with us Avantika Ramesh, Director of Products, Emerging Technologies in Salesforce, covering Web3 and AI. Avantika, welcome on board. Happy New Year. We are very excited to hear your thoughts on all the things that's going on around you.
Awesome. Thank you so much for having me and Happy New Year.
A few months back, your profile said Director of Products, Emerging Technologies, Web3, and now I see AI. Right. So is AI the new buzzword? Did the interest shift from Web3 to AI with the Gen AIs and LLM? Is that the case? Is that what's happening? Is Web3 still interesting?
That's a great question. Yes, Web3 is still alive. It's not dead. But I will say, we always follow the hype cycle. And, we're at this phase where I think AI has definitely overshadowed Web3. So I think mainly because, with ChatGPT coming out back in November of 2022 and becoming so usable and easy to adopt, we saw a lot of companies just immediately jumping on it and figuring out ways to adopt AI. But I will say, Web3 has taken a little bit of a backseat. I will say it's a little bit more silent right now. However, I still see a lot of activity in the space. I see a lot of people actively building in Web3, making it more usable, user-friendly, making it more safe. So yes, there's still a lot of exciting innovation happening in Web3, and we still have the product kept alive.
Yeah, that's great news, right? So even though it's always encouraging to see new technologies come up, it's a little bit discouraging when new technologies kill the the immediate old ones. So it's very interesting to know that Web3 is still active and thriving. So given that it is still important to learn about Web3, what's your definition of Web3, right? So I've seen the definition of that evolving over the period, and let's hear your definition. Starting 2024. What is it? How will you define that?
Yeah, I mean, I feel like, Web3 has definitely taken on a new definition considering the whole advent of AI as well. Before we used to say, oh, Web3 is this umbrella term for everything blockchain, whether it's DAOs, cryptocurrencies, non-fungible tokens. But now it's almost like a new way of interacting with digital media and the web. Now it's, even if you look at the internet, people used to navigate the internet through clicks. Now people are starting to navigate through conversations and AI intelligence. So it's almost like this new interface of activity that's powered by whether it's AI driven experiences, tokenized assets, token driven experiences. I think we're just coming up with new forms of interaction.
Interesting. You see, there is always synergies called out between Web3 and AI, right? So AI making the experience much more personalized, and Web3 is all about ownership economy. Can you explain that synergy a little bit more there?
Yeah, I think you hit it right on the head, right? It's like AI, the whole purpose of it is to create these like rich, hyper personalized experiences, collect all these insights and data points and help people make sense of it. And, AI brings in that level of automation and more, generative capability around it, right? And when we talk about Web3, it's all about ownership of data. But then with that ownership, people have that selective preference and agency over what data they share, what data they don't share. And we saw this trend happening even last year where people would selectively decide to share their information with certain brands or companies because they want to be targeted, right? They want to get those personalized experiences. And now AI takes that to another level. And that's kind of how Salesforce was also building our Web3 CRM, right? We have all these data points about an individual. We resolve all their identities into one platform. And then now you have AI sitting on top of it to make it a much more rich experience for that end user.
Mm, mm. And a CRM for Web3, what is that? What's the purpose of that?
Yeah, I mean, if you think about how people were operating in Web3, it was this new technology where you have all these new data points about individuals, whether it's token IDs, wallet addresses, smart contract addresses, token addresses, all of these new data points. And with this new technology, people didn't know how to store or make sense of all this data. So people were going back to a very old and outdated method of keeping track of data, which is Excel spreadsheets, right? Nowadays, companies, they don't keep track of customer data in Excel. They have an actual CRM technology. But when you think about Web3, these wallet addresses, these are new data points about individuals, but it's important to be able to connect those data points to existing data points about individuals in the Web2 world, whether it's their name, their email, or other identifiable information once they give consent. And because of that, we were seeing a lot of companies struggling with how they keep track of this data. It was siloed, very niche, and they didn't know how to keep it up to date either. So there was definitely a need in the market for a more enterprise and scalable way to maintain all this data about a customer who's operating in the Web3 world so that they can better bridge those experiences together. So that's where we built our Web3 CRM, which allows brands to actually dynamically keep their CRM up to date with Web3 data, whether it's the updated token IDs that a customer owns or the updated list of wallets that a customer has possession of, so that you can also start seeing, okay, what tokens does this wallet address hold? Which experiences are they tapping into and authorizing access to, right? And then connecting that with the rest of their personalized data so that brands can offer better experiences to those customers. So we saw that pain point, and that's where we felt like we need to extend our CRM capabilities to also help companies handle Web3 data.
That's a brilliant idea, right? So Web3 by itself, like you said, it constitutes many things, right? So it constitutes tokens, it constitutes ballots, and digital assets are represented as tokens, I believe. So what's the synergy between digital assets and tokens? What are digital assets?
Yeah, it's a great question. To start with, I would say digital assets are essentially any form of information that you digitize, right? It has a digital format, may have some value associated with it. But then when you go a step further and tokenize it, that's when you're extending beyond the capabilities of just putting something in a digital format, let's say in cloud, and actually putting that information on the blockchain. Now, what happens when you put information on the blockchain? The blockchain, you can think of it as a ledger, right? A trusted ledger. It's not like a database. It's where data cannot be mutated and it's not owned by a centralized authority. So with that, when you convert these digital assets into tokens on a blockchain, you have many benefits that come with it. One is immutability, right? Everyone has a copy of your data. You need a mutual agreement for any kind of changes to take place, so you can you have that guarantee that data is kind of like tamper proof, tamper resistant. Another part of this is also the access to data. You have no central authority that's having possession and ownership of that data. Rather, it's fully accessible, but you have only one individual who owns that data, who's the actual owner of that data, not some middle entity that's owning everyone's data, right? And you also have public blockchains, private blockchains. When data is on a public blockchain, that's when you get that benefit of accessibility. Everyone knows where the data is, where it's located, and can access it at any time. And I think that's very important when it comes to especially more practical applications like record keeping, because I think we've seen a lot of use cases where, you would have a central authority that hosts a lot of data. Maybe they get a vulnerability, they get a security breach, they lose that data. And as a result, everyone loses access to it, right? Or they're just dependent on that one central authority to be housekeeping all that data, which presents a lot of risks. So that's where I think the immutable, accessible, and transparent nature of blockchain actually gives you those benefits of tokenization.
hmm So this tokenization is can be thought of as a digital representation of a real world asset. Is that a loose definition? And and what are these real world assets? We all know about NFTs and bored apes. The digital arts. The assets are just that, or are we dealing with something more than that here?
Yeah, when we talk about digital assets, I think everyone jumps to the conclusion that we're only talking about crypto and decentralized finance applications, DeFi applications, right? Definitely the most obvious example of digital assets on the blockchain include cryptocurrencies like Bitcoin and Ethereum. These are prominent examples. But I think it's important for us to adopt kind of like a broader perspective about digital assets and tokens. And that's where non-fungible tokens come into play. So these non-fungible tokens, they could be things like what you mentioned, right? Like the Bored Ape, the digital art, the collectibles. But then it goes beyond that. There's also proof of attendance protocol. We call it POAPs, right? Tokens to indicate that you actually attended a certain event. There's proof of authenticity, NFTs, that show, hey, this particular asset is owned by a particular person and it's the authentic version of it, right? And that can come as a digital twin or say virtual as an asset on the blockchain. There are many different applications of it. And then there's also games. People have in-game assets that get tokenized so that you can actually take these assets from game to game because as you know, blockchains are also interoperable, which means that you are not in like one grasswall ecosystem. You can actually take it from different ecosystems because they're all from that shared ledger and they all have a similar value and meaning in these different environments. And then if we want to get more practical, people put records on the blockchain as well so that they are immediately accessible, whether it's transcripts or health records or other data. So I think there's a lot of different applications. I think it's important for people to focus on kind of like the technology narrative of the blockchain over just the financial narrative and think of cryptocurrency as tokens that help facilitate these transactions happening on the blockchain, but there's more to the story.
Hmm. And how real are the assets or the tokenization of assets like private equities, real estates, bonds, and cash? Those are much more enterprise friendly and relatable, right? So, but are these happening as well based on what you see?
Definitely. So there are definitely countries and even communities adopting the approach of selling real estate and other assets on the blockchain, and they have that economy going. I will say it's as real as the ecosystem or the community around it, right? If you don't have an ecosystem or a community that has this governance structure in place to help mediate these transactions and help everyone realize value in them, then it's essentially worthless. But we are seeing, DAOs, right? Decentralized autonomous organizations that are essentially forming communities where they transact and reward people for the work they do, or they sell land on, virtual machines. And, you have like Sandbox and all these like decentralized metaverses that are selling assets and land. So I would say it's as real as the community that surrounds these.
Okay. And you brought up another important point, metaverse, right? So it feels like people forgot about it, or at least given the hype that was surrounding that. So is that the same story like Web3? Because I thought there is a lot of synergies between Web3 and metaverse, and any assets that you own in metaverse is really a digital asset tying back to your Web3 ecosystem. So there was a lot of synergy around that, right? Is that still the case? Do you see an increasing adoption there?
Yes, definitely. There's definitely synergies. I think when we also define metaverse, there's many different definitions, right?
Mm,
I
mm,
think everyone thinks of like someone putting on like an Oculus headset, going into
mm,
Facebook Workplace and seeing like a 3D representation of their desk, which that itself is a metaverse. We're also in a metaverse right now, right? The Zoom metaverse.
mm,
So my definition of metaverse is essentially any kind of virtual environment where you can interact with another individual. And there are some metaverses that are more 3D in nature. There are also metaverses that are based on the blockchain, which are where you bring in the tie to these digital assets that are tokenized, right?
mm,
So, the ones that you see, like, Facebook created a metaverse or what we call Meta. And then we also had Gucci create their own metaverse and Roblox. Those are all, I would say, Web2 metaverses. They don't rely on the blockchain. They have their own assets. They're all within their own grass walls. So whatever assets you have in those metaverses, they kind of belong to those environments, right? You can't take a Gucci player and have that have the same value when you go into Roblox. they'll all have different values and definitions and meanings and manifestations in those metaverses. But then when you get into Web3 metaverses, like those on Sandbox or Decentraland, that's when you start seeing people being able to port their identities and their assets between metaverses and have like that backpack of information with them carried along, because all of these are kind of centrally based on the same blockchain. So I could go into Sandbox, have my backpack of assets that I collected from another brand, and then have that have meaning and value within Sandbox. Maybe I can use one of my NFTs as an access pass to a game, or they can check my wallet. So there's many benefits that they can also unlock. And then, the story just gets better when it comes to AI as well, right? I think where we saw a lot of what we saw lacking in the Web3 metaverses was just like the graphical interface and the UI, right? Many of these were like pixelated experiences that were very slow and consuming a lot of power on our laptops. I remember my laptop just heating up every time I loaded a new metaverse. And I think there's definitely new optimizations and better creative experiences that are coming along with AI powered experiences as well.
Excellent, excellent. And blockchain is really a very good foundation for interoperability in metaverse, right? So like you said, assets that is collected in one metaverse will be tradable in other, as long as they have a common platform of blockchain underneath.
Exactly. Yep.
And tying all of this back to the CRM for Web3, how does it really work? Let's say I have this proof of attendance as a token, right? So as a tokenized asset, and I have some assets from the games. So the CRM allows me to manage all of this, or who's the primary user of this CRM for Web3?
Yes. So let me give you an example, right? Let's say I'm a brand and I have multiple NFT collections that I've launched, all for different purposes, right? I want to target different personas. I have different products I'm launching. Let's say I also have a metaverse experience that I'm creating, and I want to see which of my customers are actually buying these NFTs, which of them are interacting in the metaverse. My Web3 CRM will actually allow me to dynamically track who owns my assets, who's trading my assets. These assets are traded and swapped and managed in real time, right? So it's also something where you need your CRM to be dynamic and constantly be updated. So our Web3 CRM allows a brand to import or create their own token collections, right? If they've already created their own token collections outside of Salesforce, they can actually import them into our platform and manage who the latest owners are. They can also create new NFT collections with our platform. So we allow them to create their own smart contract very securely, generate their own NFTs and media and assets within our platform, and also track those. And then for every single NFT, they'll be able to see who their history of holders were, or they can look at each NFT wallet address in their community and see kind of how they transacted. They can also use some of the APIs, and there are blockchain APIs out there that help read into a wallet and help give you information about the amount of Ethereum in their wallet or other NFTs that they own. So it's up to each brand to kind of personalize that experience, but they essentially have this data all on hand. And then they can take it a step further and say, okay, I know this person's identity. They chose to give me their email address. So now I have their Web2 identity where, they engaged in this marketing campaign. They bought these products. I know everything about them. And then I also know their activity in the metaverse and what their interests are. So I can connect the two profiles together and create an even more richer and more targeted experience.
Wow, that sounds like a one-stop shop for minting, selling, and keeping track of NFTs. Yeah, so it's like a NFT marketplace, right?
I guess you could put it that way. Essentially, you can think of it as like a studio, right, to manage your NFT and Web3 data, and also create your own data, right, without having to know any code. But if you wanted to make a marketplace, we have our commerce product already through Salesforce, and we've seen some of our customers selling NFTs and creating these reselling marketplaces. I'd say the full customization capability is all at our customers' hands.
Okay, excellent. Yeah, and switching gears a little bit, focusing on AI. You see, AI has been around us always. There is a lot of analytics that is happening around us already. But with this LLM and Gen AI, I should say the access or the topic of AI is a lot more democratized. Is that how you feel about it, or what's the revolution now? Why is there so much buzz around it?
Yeah, I would say 100% more democratized, right?
Mm.
Before, AI has been a thing for a while. People have been talking about AI in many different contexts, predictive AI and natural language processing. Those were all out there. And I think with the advent of ChatGPT and some other tools like Bard and Claude, that's when it became more accessible to a daily user or a consumer to start seeing practical applications, right? People started seeing applications as far as like productivity. Before, you couldn't just like hook up an AI to your daily workflows and start incorporating, right? You felt like you needed a data scientist to help train a model and then make sure that model really knows your data, accesses it securely, isn't biased, and then gives you an output. It was just a huge lift. And the barrier to entry was very high, along with the skill. Now, an everyday user who has absolutely no idea what AI is can just go into like a simple platform, type in a question and get an answer. And essentially, that's how easy a technology should be to get that level of adoption. And, speaking of Web3, I think that's where we were lacking a little bit, right? Where Web3 wasn't something that was easily adoptable. And that's why you see that, it took a while for it to become big and get up the hype cycle, but then it easily got overshadowed by a new technology that was far more easily adoptable and far more applicable to a daily persona. So I think, when you talk about AI, it just reminds me of kind of the challenges and the burden some people had with adopting Web3 applications. But I do think we're at a place where people are behind the scenes while AI is having its spotlight moment. They're making Web3 similarly more accessible as well, so that you don't even have to think about the blockchain, right? You can just
Mm.
think about the applications. So I think that's where AI has really differentiated itself.
True, and that's the true success of this ChatGPT like LLMs as well, right? We don't think of LLMs when we interact with it, and blockchain should be there in the context of Web3 as well, so that it becomes much more adaptable.
Yes.
So, going back to your point of increasing productivity, right? So, in my experience, and I have heard people saying that the problem with ChatGPT is it sounds knowledgeable, it looks right, but maybe not always. Sometimes it hallucinates. What's your advice on navigating this, right? So, say for example, can developers just use that to build applications? Because I have seen the code that it gives out, not always right, but it looks definitely right. So, what's your advice there? How should we go about making good use of what we have now?
I love your point on the fact that, yes, these LLMs do hallucinate, right? I think people think of these AI tools as like a black box. They think it's just magical, where you give it something and it magically outputs an answer. Where behind the scenes, it's just statistics, right? It's been trained on several parameters of data. And in the end, it's just giving you like the highest likely possibility of a certain string of text or a certain line of code based on patterns that it's observed in the past. And these patterns aren't always correct, right? But they're usually correct, right? They make sense. And I think that's where, after using ChatGPT and Bard and other tools, I started realizing, especially when it comes to like quantitative analysis and quantitative reasoning, that's when these LLMs kind of fall short, right? Because these are numbers, they actually need real logical thinking. It's not just like putting together text. So yes, you're right. LLMs do hallucinate. I think there are definitely some guardrails we can put in place to help reduce hallucination. And when we're thinking about building our AI stack, we think about policies that companies can put into place so that the LLMs kind of reduce their chance of hallucination and also reduce the chance of people coming in like malicious actors and doing this new thing called like prompt injection attacks where they can inject malicious instructions and make the LLM go haywire. So we're definitely thinking of ways to help safeguard against that. But then, LLMs can also be toxic, right? They can output harmful texts. So it's really important to have a level of agency when it comes to using these tools. That's why when we were first launching our product suite, we made sure that humans were always in the loop. It would be really dangerous if you had AI directly interacting with your customers without having any control about like what content it's outputting. It could be outputting something rude, malicious, harmful, or even sensitive data from your own environment. So I think one is just making sure humans have agency and know what's being outputted. And then your question about coding, yes, I mean, LLMs, they can output code. Sometimes it's correct, but sometimes it may not be correct, right? So even in those scenarios, it's important to make sure that you have an individual handling the outputs of AI who's knowledgeable, who can go back and say, this data is correct or incorrect and label that data. I think over time, we'll get to a point where we're able to label all these data points from these experiments with the AI and get to a point where it hallucinates a lot less. But I don't think we're there yet, unless you train a model on your own that's super robust. It's a little difficult.
Excellent. And in the Salesforce context, Einstein has been around for a long time. So is it reinventing itself in this age of LLMs? Are there some new features and functions added to it?
Great question. You're right. Einstein has been around for a while. In fact, we had a research team spun up over a decade ago to start doing a lot of this AI related research. Our team also contributed to a lot of the white papers related to AI and generative AI as well. When we started off with Einstein, we were focused on predictive AI. So whether it's like analytics, recommendations, and even when it came to our chatbots, which were launched in 2017 through the Einstein Bots Initiative, right? That was focused on natural language processing, intents. But we also started building a lot of the building blocks that are relevant even today. So, you hear about retrieval augmented generation, which is just, doing semantic search on your data. We had actually built a lot of those foundational capabilities back when we were building our bots platform. And, I remember I was actually a product manager on our bots team when we were building out the FAQ capability for bots, where you ask a question, it can search through your knowledge articles and give you an appropriate article. Now we're able to take that a step further, where you can do retrieval augmented generation, right? You have a prompt, it takes in a question, and then it's able to search through your unstructured data, find the top and relevant data points, and then actually extract and summarize that information and give it back to the end user. So I think it's just taking it a level further. We were thinking of capabilities like extraction and summarization even back in the day, but now generative AI has made that a lot more seamless and easier to implement.
Excellent. Yeah, so it'll be exciting to see what more it can offer. So we are nearing the end of the session episode today. This is time of resolution. So what are your tech resolutions, Avantika, for this year?
Yeah, I need to do a better job with my resolutions, but I would say, I think one of the challenges I faced last year, and then actually I'd say the last 2 years, right, especially as I've been on these emerging technology teams, is just keeping up with the pace of all the technology changes and everything happening. I think it's really easy to get like sucked into a rabbit hole where you hear all this noise, whether it's LinkedIn, blogs, podcasts, and Medium, right? You start hearing
Reddit.
about, yeah, exactly. I go on the Reddit rabbit hole all the
Yeah.
time as well. And you start hearing all this noise, it's easy to get sucked into that and think, oh my God, things are changing or moving really fast, which they are, right? But I think, as a product builder, it's also important to think about, okay, what's important right now and what do your customers need? I think there's a big gap between like where the technology is and where customers are right now. And we need to be able to bridge that gap and close that by creating solutions that are easy to adopt and implement. So I think one of my resolutions is just being able to better filter through the noise of all the technology, but also find a good balance between, using what's out there, but then also keeping up with the new technology. So I think I need to strike a better balance, but I also need to start keeping up with new podcasts, new blogs, and new LinkedIn authors, and trying to figure out like who are those top influencers that I want to keep up with in order to stay up to date with the latest tech.
Well, you are definitely an influencer I will follow. And that resolution is awesome. I'm going to take that up as well.
I love that.
Thanks, Avantika. Thanks for the wonderful session. Is there anything else that you want to say? Any topics, any pressing need before we wrap up?
Yeah, I think this is a great conversation, first of all. So thank you so much for having me on here. I love that the audience still keeps up with these latest trends. I think one of my predictions, honestly, is that, blockchain is going to have a comeback sometime in the future. I'm sure there will be synergies identified. maybe it's slower, but I think we're in this phase where, when blockchain was at its peak, AI was definitely in the background. People thought, oh yeah, is AI a thing anymore? And then, you saw these generative AI developments happening in the background, and then, they took the spotlight. So I'm pretty confident that that's going to happen as well within blockchain, where people don't call it blockchain in the future, maybe, but we'll start reaping the benefits of this new technology, and it will be far more accessible and user friendly. I'm already seeing a lot of developments, whether it's security, like LIP protocol or MPCs. There's also new types of smart contracts, like the ERC 4337, creating account abstraction and gasless transactions. So I can see these builders starting to move towards a place where this technology is a lot more adoptable. So I think we'll see a similar trend in the future. I'm hopeful.
Excellent. Yeah, a promising future for sure. Thank you. Thanks, Evan.
Thank you so much.
Tokenize is powered by Relevance, a leading custom software engineering service provider with over 1,200 engineers globally. Subscribe on YouTube or wherever you listen to podcasts to stay up to date with the very latest technology innovations.